Trapped in a Wyoming blizzard, Margaret found a stranger dying at her fence. Saving him sparked a storm fiercer than the snow could dream. The wind didn't just howl. It screamed like a beast unleashed, tearing across the Wyoming plains with a vengeance. It hurled snow against Margaret Lane's weathered cabin, shaking loose boards and slipping through gaps like icy fingers clawing their way in. Inside, she shoved another log into the iron stove, her hands rough and red from the cold, her breath puffing out in thick, white clouds. The fire crackled and spat, throwing faint heat, but couldn't touch the chill deep in her bones. It'd have to be enough. She'd survived on less. She pressed her back against the wall, its rough grain biting through her shirt, and stared into the flames. She'd always hated the stillness after a storm, that heavy quiet that settled like dust. But this storm wouldn't quit. 3 days now, it raged on. No birds called, no coyotes howled, not even the snap of branches under snow. Just white, thick and relentless, blanketing the world, burying anything too stubborn to run. Margaret wasn't stubborn. She was a fighter clawing through one more winter. She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders and sat at the table's edge, its surface scratched from years of hard use. The lamp flickered, casting jittery shadows. She'd rationed the oil to a trickle, kept the fire low, with dried roots and venison strips strung up on twine overhead. She'd outlasted worse, she told herself, storms that left her cabin groaning like it might give up. But this one felt alive, greedy, like it wanted more than just the land. The silence stretched taut until it broke. A dull thud echoed from outside, not the chimney shifting or her horses stirring in their snow-buried stable. No, this was heavier, solid, like a body hitting frozen earth. Her hand slid to the rifle propped by the door, its barrel cold and familiar. She paused, breath caught in her chest, then yanked on her coat and pushed into the storm. The wind hit like a wall, snow lashing her cheeks, slicing through her heavy skirts. She gritted her teeth, eyes narrowed to slits, moving slow and careful across the icy yard. A few yards out, near the corral fence, something slumped, a man, or what was left of him. She edged closer, cautious as a woman who'd buried too many regrets. His brown coat was frozen stiff, crusted with ice, his face pale under blood and frost, boots worn down to tatters. One hand gripped the rail, knuckles white. The other hung limp, useless. His lips twitched faintly. "Goddamn fool," Margaret muttered, crouching beside him. "You picked a hell of a night to die, mister." He was half gone, mumbling, tracks, fire, nonsense swallowed by the wind. No blood seeped from his gut. No rock clung to him. That was something, against every ounce of her better sense, and she had plenty. She hoisted him over her shoulder and staggered back, boots slipping on ice, lungs burning with every step. Inside, she kicked the door shut and dropped him near the stove, the thud of his body echoing in the small space. He groaned, a raw, desperate sound, clinging to life. "Don't die on me now," she said, tugging off his scarf and peeling away gloves stiff with ice. His face was gaunt, cheeks cracked open by frostbite, a deep gash slashed across his forehead, blood dried dark and sticky. "Idiot," she grumbled, digging out whiskey and a rag from a battered tin box. "Only a fool rides in this, or a man running from something bad." She splashed whiskey on the cloth and pressed it to the cut. He flinched a sharp jerk but didn't wake. "Stay asleep," she murmured, working fast. "You'll hate waking up." She peeled back his coat to check for more damage, then stopped dead. Pinned to his shirt was a battered brass badge, U.S. Cavalry. Her stomach twisted, sour and tight. Military meant trouble, the kind that stuck like damp rot. "Of course," she muttered bitterly. "Why save a farmer when I can drag in one of Uncle Sam's bleeding messes?" Still, she cleaned him up, bandaged the wound with strips of old cloth, and threw a quilt over him. He moaned again, shifting under the weight. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and watched him. The storm roared outside, mocking her. By midnight, he hadn't stirred. She sat near the stove, a book in her shaky hands. Not from cold, but memory. She hadn't read aloud in a year, not since her boy passed, but the silence bore down too hard. She cracked her lips and let the words spill. And though the valley was deep and wide, she crossed it barefoot, carrying only the stone that held her name. Her voice stayed steady, though her chest ached. The book was his, her son's, its pages still smudged with his little thumbprints, faint but permanent. She glanced over. The stranger's eyes were open, fever-bright, staring at her with dazed confusion. "You're safe," she said, startled but firm. "Don't move." His brow furrowed, deep lines cutting his face. "Where, my cabin?" "You were dying out there. I dragged you in." He tried to sit. She pushed him back with a gentle but firm hand. "You'll rip something. Just breathe." His eyes darted around. Firelight, rough walls, her shadowed figure in the dim glow. "Name's Jack," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. She didn't answer, didn't know him that yet. "You saved me. I hauled you inside and stopped the bleeding. Don't make it more than it is." A faint smile flickered on his lips, weak but real. "Fair enough." She studied him, uncertain, probably just fever talking. He didn't seem like a threat. Not yet. "Got family?" she asked, voice flat. "Anyone looking for you?" His gaze darkened, a shadow sliding over his face. No, she didn't buy it. Not for a heartbeat, but she let it slide. "You stay till the storm breaks," she said. "Then you're gone. I won't stick around long." "Good," she replied. "Don't get cozy by the fire." He chuckled, a dry rasp, then winced, clutching his side. "Serves you right," she muttered under her breath. He drifted off again soon after, chest rising and falling in uneven, ragged breaths. Her cabin felt smaller now, crowded with his presence, his gasps filling the air she'd kept to herself. At dawn, she was up before the sun peaked over the horizon, the snow falling lighter now, less vicious. She stepped outside, the cold biting her face as she scanned the plains. Nothing but white stretching endless until she spotted it. A rider, far off, a dark speck against the pale dawn, moving fast toward town. Her gut knotted tight. Someone had seen her drag Jack in, or caught him slumped by the fence. Gossip would spread like wildfire in dry grass. She went back inside, locking the door with a soft click. By noon, Jack was sitting upright, sipping broth from a chipped bowl she handed him. He looked stronger, though his eyes kept flicking toward the windows, restless, wary. "You expecting trouble?" he asked, voice still rough but clearer. "Always," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. He smirked, but it faded quick. "You trust people?" "No," she said. "You? That makes two of us." She dragged a chair across from him, the legs scraping the worn floor. "Why were you out there?" No sane man rides into a snowstorm alone. He hesitated, then shrugged, slow and stiff. "Orders went sour. People got shot who shouldn't have. I walked away." Her eyes narrowed, sharp and piercing. "You deserted?" He didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Not a uniform worth dying in." She said nothing, just stared at the stove, flames licking the logs inside. After a long, heavy pause, she whispered, "I lost my boy last winter. Fever took him in 3 days." Jack dropped his gaze to the bowl, hand still. "I'm sorry." He was 10. Loved that book. She nodded at it, still open on the table, pages yellowed but precious. He dipped his head, a quiet respect in the gesture. "You can stay till the storm clears," she said. "Then you go. Don't tell a soul what you saw here. I owe you that much." "You owe me nothing," she said. "I want quiet." The wind softened outside, but Margaret knew the real storm was brewing. That rider meant trouble stirring in town. Folks who didn't lift a finger when her son lay dying would care plenty now about a strange man in her cabin. Jack caught her glance toward the door, quick and sharp. "You expecting someone?" he asked, voice low. "Not yet," she said. "But they're coming." He didn't ask who, didn't need to. He stood, slow and careful, gripping the chair for balance, his frame still weak but steadying. Then we better be ready. You're not part of this, she said, firm. I am now. She almost told him to sit back down, let her handle it alone like always, but something in his voice, calm, solid, no swagger, made her pause. You shoot? She asked. He nodded, good enough to dig a few graves. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Finish your broth, deserter, she said. You might need the strength. Later that day, a rider crested the far ridge. Margaret knew her before the knock sounded. Ruth Grayson, stiff in her bonnet and wool skirt, smelling of lavender soap and spite. She didn't knock so much as rap the door like it had personally offended her. Margaret opened it, face blank as stone. Saw smoke, Ruth said, brushing snow off her shoulders with tight, prim lips. Thought you might need assistance, a woman alone in a blizzard. Her gaze swept the room like a bayonet, then landed on Jack, slumped under the quilt in the corner. Well now, she breathed, voice dripping with something sharp and cold. Margaret stepped forward, blocking her view, arms crossed tight. He was near dead when I found him, she said, cool and even. Pulled him from the fence myself. I'm sure you did, Ruth replied, her tone saying she believed nothing of the sort. The tension thickened like smoke. Ruth's eyes gleamed with something that wasn't concern. Does the Reverend know? She asked, head tilting slightly. I wasn't aware saving lives needed his permission, Margaret said. Sheltering a man, unrelated, in your home overnight. No chaperone? Ruth's lips pinched tight. It's not just scandalous, Margaret. It's unbecoming of a woman trying to rejoin decent society. Margaret didn't blink. I wasn't trying to rejoin anything. Ruth Grayson sniffed like she smelled sin baking in the stove alongside the fire. Jack shifted under the quilt, groaning softly. His eyes cracked open just enough to meet Ruth's glare. Ma'am, he mumbled, voice thick with exhaustion. Her nose wrinkled as if he'd offered her a dead thing. I'll pray for you, she declared, turning to the door with a flourish. Both of you. No need, Margaret said. God's been quiet for some time. The door slammed shut, taking the last shred of peace with it. By sundown, Margaret spotted a second rider, not heading her way, but toward town, no doubt carrying fresh scandal wrapped in righteous ribbon. She didn't say much that evening, her thoughts churning. Jack noticed, breaking the quiet. You always this quiet? Only when I know what's coming. He leaned back on the cot, face pale, but eyes clearer now. That woman looked at me like I was a corpse sitting up to wave. She'd have liked it better that way, Margaret said. He chuckled weakly, a dry sound. Small towns full of love and warmth. They prefer stories to truth, she said, voice flat. Buried a husband 5 years back, then a son. Neither got me a lick of kindness, just tales they could twist and tell. He nodded, slow and thoughtful. Stories are easier to control. The next morning, Margaret rode to town. She wasn't hiding. That wasn't her way. The streets were still half buried in snowdrifts, but enough folks milled about to turn heads when she dismounted from her horse, its breath steaming in the cold. Sheriff Tom Bragg stood outside his office, sipping coffee that curled vapor into the crisp air. He was a big man, bear-like, decent when sober, mean when drunk. He spotted her and tipped his hat, a lazy gesture. Lane, he said, Storm spit a body on your porch, or are the rumors true? He was half frozen, she said, meeting his eyes without a flinch. Would have died if I'd left him out there. Don't doubt it, Tom said. A pause hung between them, then, still, you know how folks get. People were always going to talk, she said. Now they've got something juicy to chew on. Tom scratched his beard, rough fingers rasping. Could have said something. Asked for help. I don't need help, she said, voice hard. I need them to mind their own damn business. He grinned, a flash of teeth. That's not how towns work, Margaret. No, she said. It's how packs work. She turned and left before he could toss another word her way. At the general store, the whisper started, Two women by the flour sacks clutched their shawls tighter. A boy giggled behind the counter, and the storekeeper wouldn't meet her eyes when she paid for salt and tobacco, his hands fumbling the coins. Outside, she saw them gathering near the church steps. Reverend Amos Gray, Ruth Grayson, and a handful of others too bored or bitter to leave well enough alone. It wasn't long before the church bell rang, a dull clang echoing over the snow, and half the town shuffled inside. Margaret didn't follow. She already knew what they'd say: sin, scandal, a widow gone astray, unfit for their tidy little world. She rode home before noon, the cold biting at her knuckles. Jack was up, sitting upright now, carving something into the chair's arm with a broken nail, the wood curling under his slow scratches. "They talking?" he asked as she dropped her bundle on the table with a thud. "Like hens on cider," she said, voice dry. "Should I leave?" "Won't matter," she replied. "Once the fire's lit, they don't care who holds the match." That night, she didn't sleep, her mind restless, replaying every creak of the cabin. The storm had quieted outside, but trouble loomed louder in her head. The next morning, the knock came early, not a polite tap, but fists that wanted to break something down. Jack's eyes snapped open at the sound, sharp and alert. "Stay there," she muttered, grabbing the rifle from its spot by the door. She opened it to 6 figures on her porch: Sheriff Tom Bragg, Reverend Amos Gray, Ruth Grayson, and 3 others she didn't care to name, all wearing the same tight-lipped righteousness, a twist of smugness in their eyes like they'd caught her red-handed. "Morning," Tom said, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Is it?" she replied, voice flat as the snow. "There's been a meeting," he said. "Folks are concerned." "I'm sure they are," she said, sarcasm edging her tone. Amos stepped forward, wringing his hat in his hands like a nervous schoolboy. "You've always been a woman of pride, Margaret. Strong, but pride can lead a soul astray." Her eyebrow arched, sharp as a blade. "You here to quote scripture or preach a sermon on my porch?" "This situation, this man," Amos said, gesturing vaguely. "You must see how it looks, how it reflects on your character." Ruth Grayson sniffed, her nose high. "A woman of virtue would never." "I dragged a dying man in from the snow," Margaret cut in, voice snapping like a whip. "Next time, I'll let God sort him early." "You're alone," Amos said, his tone soft but insistent. "No chaperone. He stayed in your home for days." The town's scandalized. "The town should shovel its own walks before it critiques mine," she shot back, unflinching. Tom raised a hand, palm out. "This doesn't have to be ugly, but folks want closure. Propriety." "Say what you mean," she said, eyes narrowing. Amos's voice dropped, almost a whisper. "Marry the man. Make it right." Margaret laughed, the sound dry and brittle as kindling. "You're serious?" "You'll be cast out," Ruth said, voice sharp as a needle. "Refused service, refused worship. Marked as immoral. And marrying a stranger fixes that?" Amos nodded, solemn. "We already spoke with him. He's agreeable." Her blood boiled, hot and fierce. She stepped inside without a word, the door banging behind her. Jack was still on the cot, watching her, not a flicker of surprise on his face. "You agreed?" she asked, voice low and dangerous. "I didn't want to cause more trouble," he said, calm. "You are trouble." "I'm trying to fix it," he said, standing slowly, favoring one leg, his frame still shaky but resolute. "By agreeing to own me like cattle?" "That's not what I meant." Her eyes burned, fury and something else warring inside. "You men always don't mean things right before you ruin someone's life." "They gave me a choice," he said, meeting her gaze. "Marry you or get handed to bounty men for desertion. I figured staying meant I could protect you." "I don't need protecting," she snapped, voice cutting. He held her stare, steady. "Maybe I do." That stopped her cold, like a bucket of ice water over her head. A silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with unspoken things. Outside, the porch creaked under shifting boots, impatient. "I'll do it," Margaret said loudly, turning to the door. "But on one condition." It creaked open, Tom's face peering in. "Name it," he said. "I wear my own dress. And it's done here. No church, no town hall. If you want a show, stand in the cold." Tom shrugged, a faint grin tugging his lips. Fair enough. They left her porch quiet again, but inside, something felt colder than the snow ever could, a chill that settled in her chest. That night, Margaret stood by the mirror in her mother's old wedding dress. Yellowed fabric, fraying lace, a relic of a life long gone. She stared at herself, a stranger in the glass. Jack stood a few feet away, in a borrowed coat too big for his frame, hair damp from a quick wash in the basin. "You sure?" he asked, voice soft. "No," she said, honest. "But if they want a performance, I'll give them one." She stepped into the falling snow, the flakes catching in her hair. The crowd was small but loud, buzzing with eager spirit. Reverend Amos Gray cleared his throat, his breath puffing white. Jack stood beside her, silent. The ceremony was quick, words mumbled, nods exchanged, done. When Amos declared them man and wife, Jack didn't try to kiss her. He knew better than to push. Margaret turned back inside before the amens faded, pulling off the dress and tossing it over a chair like it burned her. Jack lingered by the door, awkward, hands in his pockets. "I didn't want this either," he said quietly. She poured herself a drink, the whiskey sharp on her tongue. "But here we are." He looked at her, searching. "You think they'll leave us alone now?" "No," she said, sipping. "They never do." He started to speak, but she waved him off, sharp and final. "I need quiet." She sat by the fire, the crackle filling the space. He joined her after a while, settling in without a word. Silence stretched between them like glass about to shatter. Outside, the wind picked up again, and far off, hoofbeats echoed faintly in the dark, a whisper of what was coming. The sky cleared the next day, too still, no clouds, no wind. Margaret knew this quiet wasn't calm. It was a tense pause. She was up early, splitting kindling behind the cabin, axe striking steadily. 2 days after the wedding, she'd barely spoken to Jack. Not from anger, but because words weren't ready. He kept quiet too. Then she heard boots on the porch. Not Tom's heavy steps or Amos's shuffle, but a deliberate tread. Rifle in hand, she stepped out, shadow stretching in the gray light. 3 dusty men stood there, long coats swaying, spurs silent, horses tied to her post, exhausted. The leader, scarred from temple to mouth, smirked faintly. "Morning, ma'am," he said, voice smooth, distracted. "Looking for Jack Dillon. Rode this way 4 days ago." "Seen him." Margaret didn't blink, her grip steady on the rifle. "Plenty of men passed through. Storm came up sudden. Anyone out there's buried under a dozen feet by now." His head tilted bird-like, eyes glinting. "That a no." "That's a no." Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Jack stepped out, hair uncombed, hand hovering where a pistol usually rested. The other 2 men shifted, subtle but tense, hands twitching toward holsters. The scar man smiled, thin and cold. "Well now, ain't that convenient?" Margaret sidestepped, blocking their view, her stance firm. "You boys got names?" "We do," he said casual, "but they're the kind best left out of polite talk. Let's just say we're here on unfinished business. Mr. Dillon and some decisions he made." Her rifle didn't waver. "He's not going anywhere." The man's smile faded a fraction, just enough to notice. "That's so." Jack stepped past Margaret, boots crunching snow. "Margaret," he warned quietly. She didn't move. "I need to talk to them." "Like hell." He nudged her rifle down gently. "I've got this." She glared, then stepped back. Jack faced the men, firm. "Say it. Don't touch her. Don't cross that fence." The scarred man smirked. "This is about you and the law, deserter." Jack didn't flinch. "You left the colonel dead, throat slashed, 2 witnesses gone," the man said coldly. Jack's jaw tightened. He ordered a village burned. Women, kids, no outlaws. Just people. "One offered me bread." The man mocked. "Disobedience?" Jack nodded. "Treason, The man snapped, pointing. Court-martial too good. We're here to take you, dead or alive. Margaret stepped forward again, rifle back up. Try it. The man looked her up and down, amused, a smirk tugging his scar. You sure about that? She didn't blink. Try it and see. Something passed between them. An unspoken dare, razor-edged and alive. Then he chuckled, low and dark. Ain't today, sweetheart. We'll let you two newlyweds enjoy your little cabin another night. But we'll be back with more. You bought him time, not a pardon. They mounted up, turned, and rode off toward the hills without a backward glance. Margaret didn't lower the rifle until they were specks against the white, her breath fogging in the cold. Inside, Jack poured water with trembling hands, sitting at the table, elbows on knees, head bowed. You should have told me, she said, voice hard as iron. Figured I wouldn't make it through the storm. You didn't. He smiled. No humor in it, just a twist of lips. Fair. I don't like being blindsided, she said, sharper now. I know, he said, meeting her eyes. She sat across from him, the silence heavier, but truer somehow. You think they'll come back? She asked. Yeah, not just those three. They'll bring others. She leaned back, arms crossed. Then we prepare. You mean run? I mean dig in. He blinked, surprised. You'd fight for me? I didn't marry you for show, she said firmly. Now it's real. I won't let them take you dead. Jack exhaled, almost laughing. Hell. She grabbed hunting traps from the shelf, dust flying. Let's make it ugly. They worked all day, barbed wire in the brush, broken bottles by windows, planks on the back door, trenches near the shed. No words, just purpose. By night, the cabin was a fortress, grim and ready. Override by the fire, Jack asked why. She stared at the flames. Too many good men buried. And I'm done with folks thinking I can't fight my fight. He nodded. And me? She paused, then said, I don't hate you. That's something. Silence fell, firelight glowing, a quiet truce forming. The next day was too quiet. No wind stirring, no crows cawing, not even a rustle in the trees. Around noon, Margaret spotted a dust cloud in the distance. 8 riders, not bounty men anymore, but hired guns, the kind who didn't ask questions or leave witnesses breathing. She didn't say a word, just handed Jack a rifle, her movements calm but deliberate. They took their positions. Margaret on the roof, the shingles rough under her knees, Jack crouched by the window with a clear shot at the front approach. The riders came slow, deliberate, letting the sound of hooves fill the air like a war drum, steady and ominous. The scarred man called out, voice cutting through the stillness. You sure about this, Jack? Gonna die for your pride? No, Jack said, stepping into view, rifle steady. Gonna kill for my freedom. The man laughed, a harsh bark. Well, ain't that poetic? Then the shooting started, sudden and fierce. Margaret shot one in the chest, rifle cracking. Jack hit another in the gut, body thudding into snow. The rest scattered, firing wildly, bullets ripping air and shattering the window. Margaret reloaded on the roof, breath sharp, while Jack fired back, steady. She dropped a flanker mid-run. Smoke filled the cabin, gunpowder biting her senses. Jack blasted a rider on the porch, then took a bullet in the arm, dropping with a grunt. Jack! She slid down, pulling him behind the table. I'm fine, he growled, reloading. Can't stay, they'll burn it. Won't let him, she said, grabbing the lantern. She smashed the window, hurling it. Flames exploded across the oil-soaked yard, a fiery wall pushing the riders back, screaming. 2 tried to ride around the blaze, shadows in the haze. Margaret grabbed Jack's revolver and met them at the side. One went down with a shot to the throat, gurgling as he fell, and Jack, despite his wound, took the last with a crack that split the air like thunder. Then it was quiet, just the hiss of burning oil, the groan of spooked horses, and blood sizzling on snow. Margaret walked the yard slow, checking bodies, rifle still in hand. None stirred. The scarred man lay near the corral, coughing red, eyes locked on her. "You were right," he wheezed, a grin twisting his scarred face. "She's a real storm." He laughed once, a wet choke, then went still, his head lolling back. By sunset, the flames had died to embers. Margaret helped Jack inside, tore strips from her apron, and bound his arm, her fingers steady despite the ache in her own hands. "Rest," she said, voice firm. "So should you." "I will." They sat against the wall, side by side, exhausted, the silence thick with what they'd done. "I never meant to bring this to your door," he said, voice rough. "I know. You just wanted to vanish." "Didn't work?" she said, eyes softening, the hard edge dulled. "You're part of this place now." He nodded slow, "For better or worse." They didn't speak after that, just listened to the wind brushing the trees, a world still turning outside their battered walls. Dawn crept gray over the plains, shadows stretching across bloody snow. The cabin stood, battered but unbowed, smoke rising from the stovepipe. Margaret gathered supplies, salt, bullets, roots, patching windows with cloth. Jack, arm bandaged, cleaned his revolver, his face worn but eyes steady, grounded. "Why'd you save me?" he asked quietly. She tied a satchel, not pausing. "Didn't want another ghost here." He nodded. "You let me stay." She met his gaze briefly. "You were quiet, respectful, rare." He smirked faintly, then sobered. "I don't want more trouble." "You didn't bring it," she said, slinging the satchel on. "The world's trouble. You just showed its face." She paused at the door, rifles on her back. "They'll send more," she said flatly. "I know," Jack replied, standing stiffly. "Real soldiers this time." She turned, arms crossed, framed by gray light. "Then I'm no widow with a gun." He limped closer. "I'm not leaving." Her eyes held steady. No plea needed. They fortified the land, trenches packed with dirt, black powder buried, barn doors trapped. Margaret worked fast. Jack, slower but resolute, breathed white clouds. Over fire-roasted meat and bitter coffee that night, they spoke plainly. "Left Georgia at 17, Jack said, eyes on the fire. "Thought a uniform made me good." Margaret stared at the beams. "Married at 16 to hush whispers, didn't work. Had my boy. He was enough till sickness took him. Town gave pity, not help." Jack met her gaze. "That's why you fight." "I fight," she said sharply, "because when I don't, others pay." Silence bound them after, heavy with unspoken weight. Next morning, dust rose before sunrise. Jack saw it from the barn perch. Riders, wagons, cavalry flags. He dropped down, grim. "Company's here." Margaret heard wheels and harnesses, needing no count. On the porch, rifle ready, Jack beside her, they faced the soldiers. A tall major in brass-trimmed regalia dismounted, gloves on, a subtle threat. "Mrs. Lane," he called. She didn't reply. "Major Victor Steele. Here for Jack Dillon, fugitive." She spat in the snow. "He's here." Victor's brow lifted. "Good. This is military justice." "Take it to a court," Margaret said, calm but edged. "Not my doorstep with rifles and threats." Jack stepped forward, his limp slight but noticeable. "I deserted. I admit it. Refused to kill unarmed civilians, women, kids, farmers with nothing but dirt on their hands. Hang me if you want, but don't pretend it makes you just..." Victor didn't blink, his face a mask. "The law isn't always just Dillon. Sometimes it's just necessary." "I've had enough of necessary men," Margaret said, her voice cutting through the cold. "You come for him, you walk through me." Victor sighed, a faint exhale. "This doesn't need bloodshed." Then turn around. He signaled with a flick of his hand. Soldiers fanned out, boots crunching, rifles rising in unison. Jack whispered, urgent. "Margaret, no," she said, firm as stone. "No more running." A shot cracked, not from the soldiers, from her. It hit the dirt inches from Victor's polished boots. He didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed. "Last chance." "No," she said again, unwavering. Everything erupted. Gunfire lit the air like a storm of sparks. Margaret dug behind the woodpile, her rifle already cocked. Jack fired from behind a trough, his aim steady despite the chaos. Bullets tore through the porch beams, splinters flying like jagged hail. A soldier went down near the well, blood soaking into snow, a dark stain spreading fast. The barn doors blew outward with a roar. One of the traps triggered, sending flames and shrapnel ripping into the advancing flank. Horses screamed, panicked, pulling at their reins, hooves churning the ground. Margaret moved like a force, firing, reloading, firing again. No hesitation, no fear, just motion and will. Jack took a bullet to the leg, a grunt escaping him, but he didn't go down, crawling behind a rain barrel and keeping his shot steady. One soldier charged the cabin door. Margaret met him with the butt of her rifle, cracking his jaw with a sickening crunch, then shooting him point blank as he crumpled. Smoke thickened, yells turned to screams, the air heavy with powder and fear. She moved through it all like a shadow, seeing only threats, silhouettes, movement, danger. Jack's gun kept firing, even wounded, a stubborn rhythm in the madness. There was quiet, just wind whistling, a soft groan, the creak of a broken wagon while swaying in the breeze. Margaret stepped into the clearing, breathing hard, her rifle still up. Bodies lay scattered across the snow. A few soldiers staggered away, dragging wounded comrades, their boots leaving red trails. Major Victor Steele was among them, bleeding from a gash in his thigh, supported by another man, his uniform stained dark. "You should have walked away," she said, voice low and steady. He glared at her, wild-eyed, sweat beading on his brow. You're insane." She didn't argue, didn't need to, just watched as he was hauled onto a wagon and driven off, the wheels crunching over ice. No one tried to fight anymore, their retreat a broken line against the ridge. As the last of them vanished, she lowered her rifle, her hands trembling faintly, just for a moment. Jack limped toward her, legs soaked red but still upright, his face pale but set. She caught him before he could fall, her arms strong under his. "Thought you said you didn't need protecting," he said through gritted teeth, a faint smile tugging his lips. "I don't." He chuckled weakly. "Save me anyway." She got him inside, laid him down on the cot, and stitched the wound herself, tearing more strips from her apron, her hand steady now, efficient. When it was done, she collapsed into the chair beside the stove, her body heavy with exhaustion. For the first time in days, the land outside was still, no wind, no hoofbeats, just silence. "You know they'll send more," Jack said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know," she said, staring at the cracked walls, the bullet holes punched through wood, the burned scars etched deep. Then she looked at him, her gaze softening just a fraction. "I'm not fighting for you anymore," she said. He blinked, caught off guard. "I'm fighting for us." The words landed like a hammer, solid, unexpected, final. Jack exhaled, a slow breath. "You really mean that?" She nodded, a single, firm motion. He reached for her hand, tentative. She let him take it, her fingers curling slightly around his. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, gentle now, like it was tired too, spent from its own fury. Days passed, slow and quiet. No riders came, no dust rose on the horizon. Margaret and Jack rebuilt what they could, new planks hammered over gaps, fresh traps set in the yard, windows patched with cloth and board. One night, sitting by the fire, she spoke, her voice breaking the stillness. "They might stop coming." "Maybe," he said, poking at the flames with a stick, sparks drifting up. "We're enough either way." She nodded, the motion slight but certain. The plain stretched wide and silent under a clear, starlit sky, the snow gleaming faintly in the dark. The storm was done. Not just the snow, not just the blood, but the fight itself. They'd carved their place, held their ground, together, and that was the end of it. No more ghosts haunted her land. No more running shadowed his steps. Just them, side by side, in a cabin that stood against it all. The fire burned warm, the wind stayed soft, and the world let them be. Want more tales of grit and heart? Subscribe. Margaret and Jack's story ends here, but others are waiting over the ridge.